Let me ask you a question. If you've got a good story, I'd love to hear it. What was the scariest drive that you've ever taken? Go ahead and just yell it out if you've got a good story.
Death Valley.
What?
Death Valley.
Death Valley. Aptly named, I hear.
Pikes Peak.
Pikes Peak. How fast were you going?
Too fast for my passenger.
Yeah, give me some more. Yeah, there you go.
To my friend Nathan's house. There's a story if you want to hear it.
Do it. How long is the story? Is this?
I'll make it short.
All right.
So my dad had an 86 Cutlass, which was a rear-wheel drive. It's a very powerful car. I was 16. We were on a winding dirt road. The reason it was so scary is because I came around one of those corners a little fast, and that tail end just kept going. And we just spun around a couple times. Thankfully, Dad never heard about it. And I don't think he's watching right now.
So those of you that know his dad, feel free to send the link over, and we'll go from there. Yeah. Right. She's not here. That's not fair. All right. All right. Give me one more.
Mount Washington.
Mount Washington.
That's a very steep mountain. You drive down it. When you drive down, you have to go very slow, because otherwise you'll burn your brakes out.
Okay. Yeah, I can see how that can be scary. I've got several stories. It's kind of hard to pick just one or two. I can remember my freshman year in college. I didn't have a car, and I went to school about two and a half hours away from where I grew up. But thankfully for me, one of my friends from high school also went down to the same school. So whenever I would come up, I would just drive home with my friend Nikki. The problem was, every time you drove with Nikki, it was the best practice in prayer. She was a terrifying driver. I can remember one time we were driving back to Lincoln from our home, and it was night. I think it was probably 1, 2 in the morning, because we're college students and time doesn't exist. And we were driving, and there was just this black mass in front of us. And as we got closer and closer, going way too fast, we realized it was a flipped over semi. It was the underside of the semi truck, and we had to do a quick go to the next lane to not die. So that was one of them. I can also remember some mission trips that I took with some of you going into the mountains. One in particular, Blue Ridge Mountains, where we are driving this massive 15-passenger van in these mountain roads, and the kids are being obnoxious in the back. And it was some white knuckle driving there. I can remember also being in Puerto Rico on a mission trip, and they don't have guardrails. And you're driving in these mountains, and the road is crumbling up the side, and you're just like, Sunday stroll, like it's no big deal for the people driving. But I can remember the whole time looking out the side window just straight down and calculating how far that drop was. That was pretty scary. But I think the most scared I've ever been driving had to have been the drive home from St. Mary's Hospital after I didn't give birth, after she gave birth, to our firstborn, Natalie. That drive home was the scariest drive in the world. Like, it's a drive we've made hundreds of times, right? But now all of a sudden there's someone in the back seat that is so tiny. And I remember the entire drive home thinking, why did they let us leave with this baby? Like, it should not have happened. I was not ready for that. We could have stayed there another week or 2 or 10 years, and that would have probably been a better way to handle that. Anyone else who is parents, you probably have similar experiences. That was the most stressful drive ever. This morning, we're going to be starting a new series that we're calling Courage Over Fear. Because there are just moments in our lives when we face these types of transitions, like giving birth to a new child or starting a new job. There are a lot of these transitions that we experience in our lives that can be rather daunting. There are things that occur in our lives that make us feel like we are just uncertain of how this is going to turn out at all. Maybe we have this feeling of being unprepared or fear that can just cloud our ability to fully embrace the joy in change. So this week we're going to be starting this series, and it's going to be probably a 7-week series. And throughout it, we're going to be looking at the book of Joshua, an Old Testament book, because I think Joshua, it tells this story of a time in Israel's history where they were forced to transition over and over and over again. When you think about your own life, what are some of the big transitions or changes that you've experienced so far? Go ahead and yell some of those out. What are some of the big transitions? When you think about the transitions you've experienced, what are some of the big ones?
Graduation.
Graduation, yeah. I know a lot of you had college grads this weekend, right? 2 of you did right here, and I know the Veltmans are down doing a college graduation this weekend as well. Some of you have high school graduations going on this week. Maybe not this week, this month. Yeah, where's some other ones? Marriage. Yeah. Good, it's a good one though, right? He's there. Okay. Good. Yeah, so marriage, that's another big one. What are some other ones?
Starting college.
Buying a house, what did you say?
Starting college.
Starting college, yeah.
Big difference between high school and
Big difference, right?
Start my own business.
Starting your own business. Yeah. Repeat that? Yeah. Totally. Give me one more.
So it's not mine, but being drafted, I heard.
Being drafted. Yeah. That's a big one. Switching to a different school. Yeah. Yeah, those are all huge ones. There's a lot that we could say there, right? Like starting a new job, or who here has ever moved out of a house that you lived in forever to like go into maybe a retirement community or a condo or something that's totally like a new type of thing, right? Like these are very life-changing and emotional things. I can remember when we bought our house. The owners of the house we live in now had lived in that house since it was like built in the 70s. They'd been there forever. And I remember meeting with them to do a tour of the property after we had bought it so they could show us all the weird quirks, right? Because there's all these weird quirks that we're used to, but nobody else would be used to. That was a hard transition for that family as they said goodbye to that space. There are a lot of these types of moments. And yeah, most of what we just said has a sense of excitement and joy to it, right? The birth of a newborn, like that's exciting and it's joyful. Starting a new job is exciting and there's some joy in that, unless you were like forced out of the previous one, right? But even then, like it's exciting to have a new job. Maybe moving to a new space, a new house, there's excitement and joy there because you made that decision usually, right? Sometimes it's thrown upon you, but a lot of times we make those types of choices. But there's also a lot of fear. Like the drive home from the hospital with the little girl in the back seat. The joy was off the charts, but so was the fear. Because it's in these moments of transition that we have doubts and hesitations. The questions start popping up like, am I going to be good at this? What if I mess this whole thing up? What if I fail? What if this is a massive disaster? It's easy to get swept up in the fear amidst these big transitions. Joshua, that we're going to be looking at over the next several weeks, is a really interesting case study of what to do in these big moments of transition. If you have a Bible, we're going to be in Joshua chapter 1 this morning. I would encourage you to flip to Joshua chapter 1. And while you flip to Joshua chapter 1, just a little bit of context to how I'll lay the stage for what's going on in the book of Joshua. Joshua takes place right at the very end of the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. So the Israelites prior to that were slaves in Egypt, and then you had this mighty leader arise and lead them out of Egypt. You had the Exodus, you had the plagues, you had the splitting of the Red Sea. All of these things happen, and then they end up wandering in the wilderness to go from Egypt to the Promised Land. They're led by God in a physical sense, and God is present. He's there in their midst, and yet we have this roller coaster of good things happening and bad things happening. But throughout this entire journey, one, or really two things have been a constant. Moses has been your leader, and God's presence has been real the entire journey. So now that we are entering into this book of Joshua, we find a huge transition immediately. Mainly, after 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, the leader that they've had for that entire journey doesn't get to make the trip. Moses dies before entering the promised land. So now you have this situation where you need a new leader to lead the charge, and that's where we're going to pick things up in Joshua chapter 1, verses 1 through 6. After the death of Moses, the Lord's servant, the Lord spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant. He said, "Moses, my servant, is dead. Therefore, the time has come for you to lead these people, the Israelites, across the Jordan River into the land I am giving them. I promise you what I promised Moses. Wherever you set foot, you will be on land I have given you. From the Negev wilderness to the south, to Lebanon, to the Lebanon mountains in the north, from the Euphrates River in the east to the Mediterranean Sea in the west, including all the lands of the Hittites. No one will be able to stand against you as long as you live, for I will be with you as I was with Moses. I will not fail you or abandon you. Be strong and courageous, for you are the one who will lead these people to possess all the land I swore to their ancestors that I would give them." I want to talk about a stressful situation. Can you imagine what it would be like to be Joshua in this moment? How would it feel to be selected to fill the shoes of somebody as great and respected as Moses? That is such a huge responsibility. Everyone, throughout this entire journey, for 40 years, these people have been waiting for this moment to finally leave the wilderness and enter into a land that they can make their home. But what's really interesting about this, to kind of help flesh out how, not only how exciting this is, but how utterly terrifying this isn't the first time they've been in this position. Earlier in the life of Moses, they actually get to this threshold to finally cross over into this promised land, and instead of just charging forward like we're going to read about throughout the book of Joshua, they send over spies to scope out the land so they can understand what they're getting themselves into. The spies, after venturing into the promised land, come back with scary stories of giants. Instead of crossing over into the promised land, they wimp out. They get afraid and they decide to stay in the wilderness. So imagine that for a moment. Like, you know all of these stories. These stories have probably been shared for years about how scary the promised land is. You are Joshua. You're standing at the Jordan River, preparing to cross over into this unfamiliar territory, remembering all of these horror stories about what is waiting for you on the other side. Moses, the fearful leader that everyone has respected, is gone, and now all of a sudden it all rests on your shoulder. You're crossing over into the scary lands of the unknown. Some of you, as you think about your own life, are stepping into the scariness of the unknown. Maybe you're graduating high school or college, or maybe your kids are graduating high school or college, and there's all this fear and anxiety over what is next. Will I be able to find a job in my field? Will I be able to support myself? Will I ever be able to move out? Will I ever be able to land on my own 2 feet? I'm going off to college, and what if I don't make any friends when I get there? What if my roommate, and that whole situation is just bad because it's always such a gamble whether you'll even get along with your roommate? I've had so many bad roommates. Anyone else have bad roommates? It's just that part of that experience, and it can be very anxiety-filled. Maybe you can't find work. and you're waiting for something to come along, and you aren't sure how you're going to make ends meet. Maybe you're entering the age of retirement for the first time and you don't know what it's like to not work. Can you even do that? Do you have the ability to not work? Like, that becomes such a huge part of so many of our identities. What does that even look like? Maybe you're transitioning away from a home that you've lived in, and you're not sure if you'll ever find a place that feels like home ever again. Maybe you're dealing with the death of a loved one, and you're not sure if anything could ever be the same. When it comes to these transitions, it's the unknowns that can oftentimes be the scariest part. We go through these transitions and we aren't sure what's next, so we sit here and we question. As a church, we're in a park. There's a lot of unknowns. We jumped in without a church building, and I think it's natural to be afraid. I think it's natural to have fears and anxieties, to have these types of questions. With that being said, I find comfort in the story of Joshua. First off, I think it's worth noting that the God of the Promised Land is the same God of the wilderness. In his speech to prepare Joshua for this new role as leader, God leans heavily on what God has done for the Israelites so far. I was there for Moses, therefore I will be there for you. I am the same God that led you out of Egypt. I'm the same God that led you in a pillar by fire and a pillar of cloud. Like, I am the same God that provided manna and quail. I'm the same God that has been with you each and every step of the way. There's this sense here as you look at the story of Joshua. The reason you can be bold and courageous is not just with blind faith. It's relying on the fact that God has been there each and every step of the way. Joshua is reminded that the God they follow has been faithful so far, and there's no reason that you shouldn't expect that God will not continue to be faithful as they transition into the next chapter that they're entering into. I think it's also really important to remember that God is not just settling for some consolation prize in Joshua. Like, if Moses had just hang on, not died, maybe that would have been the more optimal solution to this current transition. Joshua had been studying to take this transition his entire life. He was the number 2 to Moses for a reason. Joshua had been preparing for this moment. And now the moment for Joshua is here. All that's left is for Joshua to be obedient to the call that's been placed on his life. Because the truth is, Joshua could have been like, nah. Like, I'm here, the Jordan River looks scary, I think I'll just let somebody else take the charge. Let somebody else deal with this. Let somebody else make the decisions. Let somebody else lead this thing forward. But instead, what we find is that Joshua embraces the calling on his life and follows where God leads him. What I love about this story, the way it sets up, is right here in the very beginning, the first 6 verses, you get a glimpse of everything that's about to transpire. Like, God essentially sits down with Joshua and says, all right, Joshua, you're going to cross into the promised land. You're going to drive out the current occupants. You're going to divide up the land to amongst the 12 tribes. All of these things, if you're me, would be the most daunting and overwhelming thing in the world. Like, how on earth can we even comprehend this type of transition? But what's missing? God tells Joshua all of these things are about to transpire, but nowhere in these verses does God say, here's how you're going to do all of these things. Joshua is just standing on the side of the river thinking, I don't know what's going to happen over there, but I'm going to go anyway. When you look at this story, what you find is a man who trusts that God will provide what he needs when he needs it. Joshua only knows the next step, and the next step is there. He doesn't see beyond the next step. It's just one step after another of being obedient to God's calling on his life and being faithful with what he has been given. If you're like me, that's terrifying. I'm the type of guy, and maybe you're like me, I'm going to a new restaurant. I'm the guy who researches the menu for days before I go to the new restaurant. I don't wait to get there to look at the menu. Anyone else like that? I want to know what I'm going to order when I get there. But then when I get there, I'm still going to read the whole menu anyway. Because you never know, right? It could change. But I like to know what I'm going to order when I get there, right? I like to have the plan. I like to know what to expect. But I think what you find here in this story of Joshua is there are times in our journey where we just have to trust, even when it's uncomfortable. Sometimes being uncomfortable is the best thing for us. One of Rodé and my favorite shows. We watched it multiple times, and I actually started rewatching it yesterday while I did laundry. Anyone else here, when you do laundry, you have to put on something, even if it's something you've seen 100 times, just because it's so awfully boring? That's me. If I fold laundry, I'm watching a show I've seen 100 times, just because I need something to make it not awful. So yesterday, I started rewatching one of our favorite shows. Has anyone seen the show Ted Lasso before? It's on Apple TV. It's about soccer. Yeah. Not many of you. That's okay. Here's the general premise of the show. You've got this American college football coach who's hired to go to England to be a soccer coach, because they call soccer football over there. Didn't know if you knew that or not. We're all Americans, so it's all soccer to us, right? So he's hired to be this soccer coach, even though he knows nothing about the sport of soccer. It's a hilarious show. There's a lot of heart stuff. It's a really great show. But what caught my attention as I started the season over yesterday, I was doing laundry, I was folding stuff, and this scene transpires where the main coach and his assistant coach are on the airplane heading over to England. And they ask the question, are we making a mistake? And then Ted Lasso, the main character, he says this: taking on a challenge is a lot like riding a horse. If you're comfortable while you're doing it, probably doing it wrong. I know nothing about horse riding, so if you do know anything about horse riding, you can explain the horse riding part of that to me. I don't understand that. But I think there's a lot of wisdom in that quote. When you take on a challenge, being uncomfortable is part of the experience. Sometimes we have to be uncomfortable. Joshua had to have been uncomfortable, even with the faith and the trust that he had that his God would be with him each and every step of the way. There's this uncomfortable aspect of stepping out into the unknown. But because he was willing to sit in that uncomfortable state, not to run from it, but to embrace being uncomfortable, they're able to take the promised land. They're able to journey forward as a nation, and the stage is able to be set eventually for Jesus to come along and be the Savior of the world, all through this small group's obedience and faith. So whatever transitions you might be experiencing, whether in your own personal life or in the life of our church, it will be uncomfortable. But if we respond like Joshua, if we are strong and courageous in the face of fear, God will be there each step of the way. We will be challenged, and we will grow into the people that God would have us to be when we enter into the promised land. We lead the way He is calling us to lead. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you. We thank you for being with us on this journey. We thank you for your presence. We thank you for your leading. We thank you for your Spirit that is with us, even when we're uncomfortable. Lord, I pray that as we venture forth into the unknown, whether it be with things in our personal life, things in the lives of our kids, things in the life of our church, that we embrace the uncomfortable. That we embrace the unknowns, and we use this as a fuel to activate our faith, to activate what it means to follow you, to rely upon you in your leading. Open doors for us as a church. Open doors for us in our individual lives. Help us to develop the eyes to see what you are doing and what you would have us do as we continue this journey with you. Lord, it's in your name that we pray.